Welcome, Wargamers, to this continuing series preparing you for the horrors of the Wasteland in Modiphiust's Fallout Wasteland Warfare. In this series, we've covered the backgrounds of the setting, how to actually play the fundamentals of the game with a simple mission, how to battle report. I want to talk about how to actually start building a force. My most recent battle report featured two forces at 500 caps, a Raiders versus the Super Mutants, and I'll talk about my experience there. Really, I'm not going to teach you how to power game. This is about how do you kind of cover your bases, get a good kind of all-rounder list so that you can have your units play on the tabletop like you hope that they would. Before we get into that though, I do want to say I do have a link to Modiphiust in my link tree down below. Using that link saves you 10% on all your purchases, and Modiphiust is very kind enough to reward content creators like me. And so using that link directly supports me, my wife, the channel, the cats, the whole thing, and I could not do it without each and every one of you. It's life-changing stuff and it means the world to me. Thank you so much. And if you're not in the market for anything, that's fine too. If you could just share this video or the playlist that it's in, it would also mean a great deal for helping kind of grow the channel. Now, like I said before, I'm not here to teach you how to power a game. What this really is how do we pick models and equip them to do the things that we want them to do on the tabletop. So for example, if you have someone who's trying to hack a PC and he's like, you know, he's a hacker guy for the Brotherhood of Steel scribe or whatever, he should be good at getting into computers. You should use him in that role. We can equip him to excel at intelligence checks. The big idea is to make a force that allows you to tell the story you're wanting to tell in your game. That story could be winning a tournament, or it could be a narrative thing that's generated by all the bajillion additional or optional rules that Modiphiust has. But let's start here. I highly suggest you check out the Modiphiust app for Fallout Wasteland Warfare. It condenses and organizes it all for you. It has a list builder and a campaign tracker. If you decide to build your own settlement, there's an entire campaign option that you can do, or not do if you don't want to, but basically it allows you to collect items from the Wasteland like you do in the video game. Bring it home, scrap it, build up your settlement. Now, whether you go with the app or pen and paper, it's time to start making your first list. For your first mile marker, you know, once you get past your demo games and you get comfortable with it, I do suggest starting playing at 500 caps. This was the point value that we played at Adepticon, and I actually really like it on a variety of table sizes, 3x3, 2x2. It's enough room for all the different factions to feel different. The Enclave army felt different to the Brotherhood of Steel player that I played against, to the NCR, to my Raiders. We all kind of crafted our lists differently. We had enough room points-wise to vary things up between a few elites or a bunch of chumps, that kind of stuff. All that to say, I think it's a good kind of first marker, I guess, for a list. Now that we have our list, you know, point value, let's start adding some fighters. And this is where I'm going to start to pivot from specifics to generalities, because what your list is trying to do will ultimately shape what it is. So what I mean by that is, if you're going to a tournament like I did at the Adepticon thing and you want to win games, right, on victory point, you are going to be looking for force multipliers and the way to get the most value out of every cap and how these units all interwork with each other, versus someone who's more like me, even though I went to the event, but like I also in my own time play the solo version of this game with narrative add-ons. I'm doing this, I'm crafting a party for roleplay. So when I say things and give suggestions, it's because I want you to have a fun experience at the one level, meaning the role-playing experience. It should still be fun to play the game, but I'm not going to be fine-tuning lists for the competitive stuff. The first piece of advice I can give you is just to diversify your skill sets. In Fallout Wasteland Warfare, different tests or things that you can interact with will require different skill sets. And so in your faction, whichever that might be, you will find that some skills are abundant, others are rarer. For example, Raiders have few hackers. We are not a smart bunch. Super Mutants, kind of the same way, to be honest with you. Now, there are models within those factions who can do the hack skill, of course, but that is to say that every faction has some skills they see at a premium and others they have an abundance of. Making sure that you have all the necessary skills for the adventure that you're going on, like I said, whether it's a tournament to achieve the objectives or in your role-playing experience, if your party just doesn't have a hacker in there, you're going to be real stumped when you hit a computer. The main things you're going to need to be able to do are, of course, fight, so you need someone who's pretty good in melee or pretty good at shooting. We'll go through how to make people pretty good at stuff, but you need someone who's good at fighting And then also hacking and lockpicking are the ones that I would really suggest you keep. Now, when you add a fighter, for my next piece of advice here, what I suggest is that you give them a job to do. And I like this for competitive stuff where you're thinking about the points focus of things, but also on the narrative side of, you think about your, typical D&D party. You have, the paladin style warrior or barbarian. You have a mage style sorcerer, and then kind of a thief assassin. Those are kind of your three general archetypes: warrior, thief, mage. And everything else is sort of like a place on that. You sort of want to have the similar thing here where each role is either moving towards the objective of killing or support killing stuff if you're playing the competitive side of things. For my more roleplay open world experiences, I like to bring characters that are really good at very different things. Like I said, when I pick a fighter, I give them a job. So let's go through an example of this. This is Boom Boom. If I want Boom Boom to do the best job that she can, I'm going to look at her sheet and see what she's already good at, before adding any kind of equipment. Well, she has an impressive melee stat of 7, and is only okay at pistols and has no access to the rifle skill at all. In addition, she gets slower if she wears any armor, but she can climb over things like a jungle gym if she's unarmored. She gets a free climb test, essentially. Now, when I put all this together in my head, I look at Boom Boom and I say, I want to give her a melee weapon, no armor because I want her to move as fast as possible, using terrain to hide and then auto-climbing over it, right? Leaping out it. She is a little melee missile, and she is good at that with her base stat line. And then the question becomes, not only can we make Boom Boom good at this, because she's naturally good at fighting, but how can we make her great at it? In this example, just add drugs. In my lists, I always have 2 psychos that both have jet with them. This allows them to do an extra reaction move, so they can take the jet, immediately reaction move, and then make a move action, and then a charge. And so if I want to, I can tie up my opponent in their backfield because I can rocket Boom Boom and the other psycho all across the board. More often than not, I try to do stuff like let the opponent come to me and then I can quick move, charge, and attack, but you get the basic idea. She won't live very long because she doesn't have any armor, but Boom Boom is here for a good time, not for a long time. And so if I can use her to position stuff and get an advantage or initiative on the board, it's a great use of her. Every faction will have fighters that reflect their character, right? Raiders have cheap dudes that are generally disposable. Brotherhood of Steel have either high armor or very intelligent scribes with them. Super mutants lean on raw strength for things. Like I said before, each will have skill sets that are in abundance, others that they sorely lack. Now let's move from kind of generalities to talking about equipping different fighters, right? I mentioned that I gave Boom Boom a melee weapon. I kept her unarmored because I wanted the speed, but that's, kind of an outlier. She has a special ability that makes that worthwhile. What about the average character? Well, like I said, we have to think about the job that they want to do. So essentially, most characters you're going to want to equip them with a weapon and maybe armor. Generally speaking, I suggest some kind of armor, unless it would, deny you a special ability like in the Psycho's case. But syncing up the weapons to their skill set is just very obvious and very important. And then when it comes to armor, assuming there's no penalties to putting armor on them, right? The Psychos are a very specific example of that. But assuming there's no penalty, you generally want some kind of armor on your fighters. How much you put on them, I think, depends greatly on how long you actually expect them to survive. Boom Boom here gets no armor. It slows her down and it inflates her point cost in a faction of cheap dudes, right? I could just go get a whole nother Boom Boom and the prime prices it takes to get a good weapon and whole armors and that kind of stuff. Now we'll just get another one. But that same logic doesn't apply to, say, a super mutant brute, who's a great character and he's tough and he costs a lot of caps. So investing in him to stay alive makes more sense. If Boom Boom is the melee missile, the brute is the melee H-bomb. If you give him a super sledge, he is art in motion. So like I said, pick a weapon, pick armor depending on how much you want to invest in them. And one thing that's important to remember, especially if you are using the Modiphius app, there's a lot of weapon options. Okay, this game, every time they release a new wave of stuff, they have just weapons that are just slightly different and they don't really make massive difference most of the time. What I would say is keep things simple at first. So bullet weapons, right? Your pipe weapons, assault rifles, pistols, shotguns, all of those are very straightforward when it comes to learning the core mechanics of the game. When you start moving into the more esoteric weapons and lasers and that kind of stuff, the special rules kind of stack up a bit. But if you keep it simple, this is very quick to learn. My point is, what's great about the game is that you can throttle its complexity by just choosing simple war gear. If you kit your average gang out like you see raiders or settlers in Fallout, where it's just, again, those basic ballistic weapons, equipping them is very simple and cheap. You can get more guys in. I consider special weapons to be like an investment that I need a character who's built around that to do really well with. And there are definitely times for that. I just don't feel like the raiders have a lot of it because their guys tend to be more disposable. So guns, armor, and then chems if they let you do something clutch. So those are my takes on list building. Just do that a couple times. Generally with 500 caps, you'll have somewhere between 4 and 7 fighters. Most of our lists were 6 at the Adepticon list. That's what mine is. And it's a good number for learning. You can kind of split off in a couple directions. You'll feel yourself pulled in a lot of different directions in the scenarios, and I can't recommend it enough. But lists aside, let's start talking more abstractly about factions. Now, it's important to say, like, up front, every faction will have every skill in whatever that you need. No one's like blocked out of things entirely. Like I said, some things are at a premium, but for example, super mutants can hack, right? They have an enslaved techie in their faction list. So as a faction, no one's locked out of really anything. That being said, they do all have unique rules to make them feel different and play differently on the tabletop. The most important rule when it comes to this kind of stuff, whether you're competitive or not, doesn't really matter, is you just buy and paint the models that you like the look. I like raiders. There's a reason I used Boom Boom a lot in these videos, because I was so inspired by this model. I fell in love with the game just because of how nostalgic it made me for Fallout. Each faction in this game gets access to a unique rule to add flavor, as I mentioned. So once you've decided what you like, then kind of investigate what they do. And I say that because these rules are not typically massive. They're not game changers. They're not like Games Workshop games where it's like an army rule kind of defines it. These are more like small nudges. A perfect example is raiders. Just basically when you take chems, they start to wear off throughout the game. Raiders get to have the last round of effects last 1 round longer. That's it. It's not a big thing. I mean, by that time, most of it is out of your system and it has like its worst level of effect, but it just lasts and persists for a little bit. So it's little things like that. The only thing I have to say really when it comes to picking your faction is to not let faction rules define your playstyle. By that I mean, I don't take chems on every single raider. Even though my faction rule affects all my raiders, I don't spend the caps on it unless I want to, or unless I have a purpose for it or I'm doing something with it. So you do as you like. I mean, if you're playing the role-playing side of things a little bit, you're going to come into possession of chems, and you can use them whenever you want. I don't care. But if you're buying a list and kind of building it from there, just have a purpose for them. And that same logic goes for all the other factions, right? If they give you a bonus in something, it's not saying you have to do that, or you're a fool if you don't lean in, or you're missing something if you don't. It's just usually a tiny little buff, little nudge to make things a little bit better. One option all your models will have is the choice to make them heroic. Now, for most lists, honestly, when you're just starting, I say pass on heroic stuff. Essentially what it does is it gives your stats a little bit of a boost, it gives you access to more skills, and kind of makes you like the player character in my mind. That's how I go through it anyway. Essentially, it gives you all the skills you need to be able to like play a more in-depth version, almost making it like a analog version of the tabletop game. And you can, and some folks did at the, I think, Adepticon event, but I just don't care for it because I kind of like the more lighthearted skill checks and that kind of thing. Now, next on the note of collecting things. So, we have the list we want to do. We're learning about the different units. Let's talk models, the actual physical starting a collection here. As I said, go with the ones you like the look of, and each faction does have a sort of starter set. I recommend picking that up. Now, a few things are really important to note about Fallout compared to other war games that use miniatures. There is no what you see is what you get here. By that I mean a raider with a pistol is a raider. You can just decide what it is. He can be any kind of raider. It could be a scaver, could be a psycho, could be all those things. Just as long as it's communicated to your opponent what that model represents, no one's going to get mad at you if you show up and you have different, loadouts on your units than you do on the models on the table. They only make so many types of models and weapon options and poses, and keep in mind that if there are other models you like the look of, they can be, like, you can feel free to model stuff as you want. If you like a Brotherhood of Steel guy, but you want to shave off the Brotherhood markings and make him a raider or something, go for it. Swap heads, weapons, whatever you want to do. Remember that just about every faction can bring a robot to counter all kinds of monsters and stuff all out in the Wasteland. There's a lot of modeling opportunities is what I'm saying. This is a game where these pieces represent something, and as long as you have the list that says, you know, this is my raider, they have this weapon, they're holding chems, and this armor, like, it doesn't matter what the model is. To put a pin on this discussion, just want to reiterate a few ideas here. Choosing a role for each of your fighters, equipping them as best as they can to do that role, and then deploying them to do so on the tabletop is how you win games. It's very simple. Make sure you have all the skills you need to achieve the objective, and that everyone is as well equipped to do so as they can be. But also understand that success can mean a lot of different things. Like, I have my 2 psychos who are made basically to not exist by the end of the game, right? They run in and get into combat or whatever, but the other fighters then take the objectives. They're in the list, they're integral to it, but they're also disposable. But that's the plan. So you can have units like that as well. What makes something the best for its role is going to obviously depend on the game and what you need it to accomplish, but it's pretty consistent in terms of finding what they're good at and emphasizing. Don't get lost in the options that you have on the app or with the cards. Like, there's just a lot of different weapon options. Pick something simple at first and move on from there. As I said before, I strongly recommend checking out the Dirt Haven Dust Up mission pack for learning your early games, and I have that in the description down below. Go check that out. Along with using some basic weapons and that kind of thing, you'll see a battle report and tutorial here on the channel going through, and you can start playing in like 25 minutes. So anyway, friends, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming.